Well known as a pastor. He wrote this book called Point Man, and it was talking a lot about the responsibilities of men as fathers and leaders in the house. It was actually very, very good. Very, very good. So I was thrilled to see them, but I really had not anticipated hearing from Mary as being something that was going to be a big deal. Yeah, I know. Your expectations are low. But she hadn't published a book at that time. She did later called Choices, which I read part of. Very, very good as well. However, while we're there, Steve said some great stuff. I mean, really, really good stuff. But I don't remember any of it. What I remember is what Mary said. And at one point in the week that we were there, she said she was really on this crusade in a way to re-elevate the role of women, especially as being mothers and homemakers. I mean, to really put that up at the top of the pedestal, because at the time it had really suffered in terms of worth in the common culture idea versus just outside careers. Now, there's nothing wrong with outside careers, but she was just saying, I just want to bring it back up on par. So it's respectable for women to choose home as their primary place of investing their efforts. So she was there. So what she said, and that's not an unusual message, but what she said is that she asks women all the time. She says, so what do you do? And they'll tell me what you do. And she says, well, early in my life after we got married, I decided I could have one of two things. I could either go out and I could work on marketing potato chips to the world, or I could raise the next generation of leaders in my home. So, believe it or not, every time I see potato chips, I think of what Mary said. That's the conditioning. And she went on through the week and really reinforced what she was talking about. And as I was thinking about it, what an extraordinary investment it is to invest in your children, not just mothers, but also fathers, in a way that today is really fallen out of favor. I mean, very much fallen out of favor. Not only with the lack of homes that have fathers there, but even then that forces the moms to work and it takes them away. And unfortunately, the losers in the entire deal are the kids. And so I wanted to reinforce today the potato chip idea with Mary. You going to be a great marketer of potato chips? Or are you going to raise the next generation of leaders? Well, I think, okay. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do it a little roundabout and maybe with a story you don't know about. 2 weeks ago, we finished that list in Hebrews 11 of the people of faith. Remember them? And at the end, he runs out of ink or something. And he says, what more shall I say? Time will fail me to tell you about da 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 da. And there on the list is Samuel. We're going to talk about Samuel today and his mom, because Samuel really has an extraordinary effect on the timeline of the nation of Israel. And I want you to see the role that his mother played in this. So let me just do a thumbnail sketch of Samuel for a second, okay? At the beginning of Israel, you see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their sons. That's the 12 sons who become the 12 tribes. But they're in the promised land originally. And then a famine comes, and at that famine, they decide to go look for food. And where do they go? Well, they go to Egypt. And so they go to Egypt. The relationship with Egypt starts off pretty good, in fact, and then it sours, and it gets really, really bad. After about 4 centuries, they forget their favored status. But God saves them from that by raising up Moses, but he only gets them as far as the desert because Moses is not allowed into the promised land. But his protege, Joshua comes along and does bring them back in the promised land. And once they get into the promised land, then they're governed in a funny kind of style. That's what we call a period of the judges. In reality, it was supposed to be a period, once they got settled in the promised land, supposed to be a period where God will be your king. And you'll have judges to settle disputes between neighbors, but God will be your king. However, very quickly, they got out of the mode of thinking of God as their king. They got in the mode of what it says at the beginning and ending, the closing bookends of Judges. The book of Judges says they did what was right in their own minds, in their own hearts. And it didn't work out well. It was just horrible. So when you read Judges, it's like what I call a graphic novel of craziness, of people doing what they thought was right. And it's interspersed with people who are shining lights as judges, people who shine against the horrible place that the country has gone. They very much so rejected God as their king, but these judges had to keep things in line. And some of these judges: Samson, Deborah, Gideon, So you know these famous names. These are people who are bright lights in a very dark time. So you go into the period of Judges where God's supposed to be king. But then they ask for a king, and then you have King Saul, followed by David, and followed by Solomon. And then after Solomon, there's a dispute about who should be the next king. And as a result, they come up with 2 kings, and the nation splits into 2, and they have 2 lines of kings after that. So where does Samuel fit? Samuel's right there. Samuel is in the whole period between the end of the Judges and the beginning of the first king, and even the second king. So that's Samuel's influence. He's very influential. He is a rudder in an aimless place. So he is there and does great stuff as a result. Now, during the end of the Judges period, Samuel was actually well known as a judge. It says here in 1 Samuel 7:15, Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, and he went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all these places. So as disputes came up, they would say, in these areas, wait till Samuel comes in town. He will bring justice to this dispute. So that's what he did. He was a circuit judge, is what he was. He was highly respected for that. By the way, Deborah, although we know Deborah in the context in Judges of her in the fighting against the bad guys with Barak the general, you start off the whole scene with Deborah. She's sitting under a palm tree with people bringing their problems to her for her to decide in disputes. I think that's just a great picture. That's a great picture. I love Deborah. If you don't know Deborah, you got to find out about Deborah. So there's Samuel as well. Great guy in that particular sense. And then near the end of the time of the Judges, all of a sudden the people say, give us a king. We want a king like everybody else. You know, this life that's here is just crazy. Now I'm adding a lot of words in their mouths, but they became very dissatisfied with how life became under the Judges, who were far and few between, and under this, supposedly, God is our king, but he's not really doing anything for us, and life here is horrible. So we want a king like everyone else, because everyone else has a king, and it looks like things are working out really well where they live. Well, they asked for a king, and Samuel, being a respected guy, gets really ticked off. The thing displeased Samuel, and I cut out some of the more powerful language right after that. He really hated this. But the Lord said to Samuel, oh, look, obey the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. So here's this juncture in the life of the nation of Israel. They are dissatisfied with how things are, but they will not put God back on his throne. So they say, we want a regular guy king. So they choose Saul. They choose Saul, and God allows it. He was a head above everyone else. He just looked like a king. So they said, "There's our guy right over there," and God allows it. So they get Saul. Well, those years aren't really great as well. And if you go through the life of Saul, near the end of that, God says, "Let's change things. We're changing kings." And He says to Samuel, who's the guy who anoints the kings, He says, "Fill up your horn with oil." That's, like a horn that's hollowed out. It's like a pitcher. Yeah, okay. So fill up your horn with oil and go to this house, Jesse's house. And he goes to Jesse's house, 1 Samuel 16:13. And Samuel took the horn of oil, anointed David in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And so now we have David as king. And Samuel is right in the middle of making this happen. This is a really big deal. There's a lot of conflict that happens near the end of Saul's life and the overlap with David's life. Lots of conflict. A lot of psalms come out of the persecution that David feels from Saul, because Saul knows that this kid is going to be king. He's my rival. Let's get rid of him. Let's kill him. Let's bring our rivals close. Let's bring him into my house. Let's let him sing songs for me so I can throw spears at him. Yeah, that'll work good. A lot of stories right there. Anyway, so David becomes king. All this happens with Samuel being there. Now, the question that you have to ask yourself is, throughout all this conflict and this turmoil at the end of the period of the Judges and coming into the first king and going to the second king, what would have happened if Samuel himself was not there? I mean, God can do anything he wants to, and God would have made things happen the way he wanted to. But the issue is, more on the positive side, how exactly did God use Samuel to make these events work out for God's will? Because Samuel was key. He was key. He needed to be the man on the spot. And I've always wondered, what if Samuel wasn't there? Maybe someone else would have taken his place? I don't know. But what we can be thankful for is the fact that Samuel was there because of a woman named Hannah. Or how you say it in Hebrew, Hannah. Hannah. Isn't that fun to say? Hannah. Oh, Hannah. Hannah. I'll keep saying it like that. I hope it doesn't distract you. So she is the mother of Samuel. But there's something absolutely amazing about her story. And she only, in the entire Bible, only occupies about this much of the Bible. I mean, this much. It's maybe 2 pages. But what she does is remarkable. And what she does then brings about Samuel. And Samuel brings about David through the Holy Spirit. So let's look at Hannah. Let's see what she did. She's not really well known. She's very much alike to Mary and Joseph, Mary, the mother of Jesus. And you'll see the similarities. But Hannah. Okay, let's take a look. So we go to 1 Samuel 1. By the way, there's 2 books in the Bible named after Samuel. Important guy. Which was just why it really ticks me off that the writers of Hebrew got to the end of the book and said, we don't have enough time to talk about Samuel. Are you kidding me? And David, are you kidding me? Yeah. Anyway, okay, let's look at Samuel. Here we go, verse 1. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim who had 2 wives. Now, this is not endorsing polygamy, because you'll see in a second, this did not turn out well, okay? Every time there's polygamy in the Old Testament, it turns out horribly. Okay, so anyway, he had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah, okay? So those are the 2 wives. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now, if you know the origin stories of the tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Jacob, you know that there was just a little bit of rivalry amongst the mothers there because of this entire thing. And this is it in spades. So we have this conflict that's brewing because of this right here. If you're epileptic, don't look at that for a second, okay? Okay, so it goes on, verse 3. Now this man, he used to go up year by year from the city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh. Now, we're still in the period of Judges, so the temple has not been built in Jerusalem yet, right? They came out of the desert with the tabernacle, with the Ark of the Covenant, with the tabernacle, with the lampstand. They moved from the desert after a generation, moved into the Promised Land. And when they came into the Promised Land, where did it settle? Shiloh. That's where it settled. So where is Shiloh? If you know where Jerusalem is, you just go north a bit till you get to about Bethel, which is kind of halfway up into Samaria, and it's sort of right up in there. So they were in Shiloh. So all the religious stuff was going on in Shiloh at the time. And so he used to go up yearly. And by the way, there's 2 passages there on the right. The Joshua one will tell you about the fact that they settled the tabernacle in Shiloh. And the other passage over there in Judges tells you that as a result of that, what they did as a festival, in a sense, was go to Shiloh once a year. So that's what's going on. So here we go. We're in Shiloh. So it says that this man would go up to Shiloh, where the 2 sons of, I'm going to call them Hebrew, Eli, not Eli. Eli's coming. No, Eli, okay? Eli. 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. Now, he mentions this in passing because you need to know something about these guys, all right? This is the priesthood. 1 Samuel 2:12, he doesn't mince any words. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They didn't know the Lord. But these guys are the priests of God. I mean, but they're worthless men. How worthless? Well, they started messing with the sacrifices and the meat. And it goes on and it summarizes, thus the sin of these young men was very great in the sight of the Lord. For the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. You got to go read it. It describes it. It's pretty bad. But that's not the worst of it with Hophni and Phinehas. Here's the worst of it right here. Now, Eli was very old, and he kept hearing all that his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting. What? Yeah. Well, that's very much what the religious people outside of Israel did. I mean, it turns out their temple ceremonies always had some kind of mixture of sexual weirdness in it. And now here's Hophni and Phinehas. I mean, they're just out of control. And Eli is not doing anything to control them. It's just out of control. And so that's the circumstance when you come to Shiloh, is these 2 guys prominently doing what they're doing. You got to know that before the story goes on. And they were priests that should be in scare quotes to the Lord. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the story goes on. So on the day that Elkanah, that's the husband, Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah and his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But Hannah, he gave a double portion because he loved her. She didn't have any kids, but still he gave her a double portion, though the Lord had closed her womb. So here's Elkanah. He's got two wives. The one, Peninnah, she's got kids galore, providing all these offspring. But Hannah, she's just nothing. And it's a great embarrassment to her. But he loves her, so he senses her sense of unworth. 6. So her rival, that's Peninnah, used to provoke her and grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. Neener, 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 neener. So it went on year by year as they went to Shiloh and worship. Every year they'd get there and Peninnah would say, I've got kids, where's yours? God must have cursed you. And she'd rub it in every year. And it was horrible. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Hannah put up with a lot of bad stuff from her sister wife. I better take that off because it'll make you spaz out. Okay. Therefore Hannah wept. It doesn't take much to crawl into her shoes to understand what she's putting up with. Because every single year, it says year by year, we don't know how many years it says, but every single year, she and her sister wife would go with the husband down to Shiloh. They would do their yearly sacrifices, all their religious stuff. And every single time, Peninnah would just rub it in. You don't have kids. God has blessed me. What have you done that God won't bless you? And so she wept. She wept. And she wouldn't eat. Now this is talking about one particular trip to Shiloh that they did that. I mean, she was so crushed by this and the ongoing problem with this, and her not understanding why God would not allow her to have kids in the face of her stinky, sister wife who's just rubbing it in all the time. Now again, if you go to the tribes of Israel, you look at the wives that produced the 12 tribes of Israel, the sons. You've got a huge kind of reproductive race going on. And in order to increase the odds of who's going to make more babies, they even started including their handmaids in it. So now we have 4 moms going, and it's a bitter competition. It's horrible. That's why I say polygamy never shows up well in the Old Testament. It never does. It's just a bad deal. So poor Hannah, she wept and she wouldn't eat. Now Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Seems a little clueless to me. Yeah, okay. Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? And right there, if I was an editor of this text, I'd put in the side, get a clue, man, get a clue. But he does say one nice thing here. Am I not more to you than 10 sons? Well, no, you're not. It was, for Elkanah, it's a great effort. Well, it's not even a great effort. It's a mediocre effort. No, it's not even a mediocre effort. It's just a misguided, stupid effort. I mean, So here she is being abused by this guy's other wife as routinely and as brutally as possible. I mean, demeaned because she can't produce any babies. And then you've got Elkanah, who says he loves her, but he's kind of clueless. I mean, am I not enough to counteract the fact that you don't have any kids? In fact, don't I even count like as 10 sons? No. So her response to this is nothing. She's silent. Verse 9. So after they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. So they finished what they came to Shiloh to do. Hannah rose, and now Eli the priest was sitting on a seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Because, he's a priest. At least we don't have the Hophni and Phinehas idiots. So Eli, their father, is there. He's in proximity. And she was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. Right there at the entry, it seems like, to the tabernacle. Remember that tent tabernacle? She's just, she's just praying to God. She's weeping as close as she can get to God. And there's Eli, who's right there as the priest who's supposed to take care of all the actions going on in the tabernacle. And he sees this. He sees her doing this. Now, talk about sensitive men. In just a second, his reaction will just amaze you. So she vowed a vow and said, now this is what she prayed there at the entry to the tabernacle. O Lord of hosts, by the way, O Lord of hosts, Yahweh of the hosts of heaven. That's actually, when you see Lord of hosts, think about armies. That word host is used for armies. So think about you, Yahweh, who are Lord of all the powers of heaven, all the angels. So it's a power thing. O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son. Then I will give him to the Lord and all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. And this is what she's praying. Just give me a son. By the way, that last statement is a reference to the Nazirite vow, and you can read more about it in number 6. But it's really a particularly devout separation to God from the culture. It was usually only for a temporary amount of time. But in Samuel's case, it's going to be a lifetime thing, a particular separation to God from the culture. And so she says, as she's weeping there in front of the tabernacle, as close as she can get to the presence of God, she's weeping and saying, remember me. Remember me with a son. In a way, she's between the lines, she's saying, do you even see me? Now, she could have been there at the tabernacle at the entry, crying out to God in her bitterness, God, why have you done this to me? You've given my sister wife all this fertility, but me none. You've closed me up. Why have you done this to me? This isn't fair. You know what I'm talking about? She could have just whined the whole time she was in front of there. That's what most of us would have done. We would have said, God, I don't understand. Why have you done this? And she says, no, all I'm asking for you is that you remember me, and don't forget your servant. Give me a son, and I'll give him back to you forever. That's what she prays. Well, here's the sensitive Eli's reaction. And she continued praying before the Lord. And Eli, he observed her mouth, and Hannah was speaking in her heart. Only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. You know, you do that sometimes when you read. Well, you're not supposed to, or when you pray, your lips move, but you can't hear anything. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. Good job, Eli. Just as we were hoping some godly man would step into the fray and say, oh, dear woman, why do you, she's drunk. Now, this semi-explains why things got out of hand with his sons, because it looks like Eli's not a great judge of what's going on. It also might be an indication of how twisted the people who came to Shiloh every year had turned that celebration into when they came. I mean, it might have been routine to see drunken people there. I mean, if Hophni and Phinehas were getting away with laying with the women that were there as part of the temple thing, I mean, who knows what kind of weirdness that Israel had sunk into. But anyway, in his sensitivity, Eli says, oh, look, she's a drunken woman. She's moving her lips. So Eli says to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. I mean, it's so helpful. In the whole story, she seems to be surrounded by inept men. I mean, maybe with her husband, Elkanah, maybe well-intentioned, but it says he loved her, but just didn't know what to do. And Eli, who does this? Well, now she responds. But Hannah answers, no, my Lord, I'm a woman troubled in spirit. It's too bad she had to say the obvious. I'm a woman that's troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord. It's a nice play on words there. I haven't been pouring drink into me. I've been pouring out my soul to the Lord. You completely missed it. You completely missed it. I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman. Oh, gosh. It just breaks my heart. Don't regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I've been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Troubled in spirit, great anxiety, vexation. Because remember, she's been putting up with this for years. And every time, ostensibly, they come to where God is, she's under the ridicule and vexation of her sister wife. So every time you think you're going to come to a place of justice and God's presence and some religious order in the country, we come there and my sister wife decides that I'm just going to rub it in another time. Neener, God's blessed me and he hasn't you. And twists the knife every time. So instead of finding some kind of healing from the brokenheartedness she has from this womb that seems to be broken, instead of finding some kind of understanding, some kind of healing from the presence of God there, this is what she gets. She just breaks my heart. Then Eli answered, "Oh, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you've made to him." Okay, good job, Eli. Good job. He doesn't argue with her. He just, when he says go in peace, he's basically saying chill. Okay, it's like, I'm sorry, just go in peace. But then because he's the priest, that next line he says somehow sinks into her like, well, maybe the priest is telling me that God's going to answer my prayer. Because see, the priest says, the God of Israel grant your petition that you've made to him, which sounds just like an empty kind of, well, I hope things work out for you. It's not that. It's Eli saying, God's going to come through. And this is what she hears. This is what she hears from Eli. So next, her reaction is really telling. And she said, well, let your servant find favor in your eyes. Yeah. Let your servant find favor in your eyes. And then she goes on. Then the woman went her way and she ate. Yay! And her face was no longer sad. So something about Eli's statement to her in response to her prayer, she says, maybe there's something here. Maybe you can almost see a little spark of hope coming right here. Because Eli says, the God himself, the God of Israel, grant your petition. If the priest of God says that, then maybe it's going to happen. This is the first time in the story you see any spark of hope for her. So she ate, and her face was no longer sad. Well, you got to go back home. They rose early in the morning, worshiped before the Lord, and then they went back to their house in Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife. He kind of knew. You know what that means, right? Okay. So Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Woo! Yeah. And in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel. And why? Well, she said, I've asked for him from the Lord. Well, it turns out Samuel the phonetics has a striking resemblance to two words in Hebrew. One of them is listen. We talk about the great Shema, because his name is actually Shamuel. But one is listen, and the other one is ask. They're very closely related. It's a wonderful kind of connected two words, listen and ask and listen. They're the same. So what she's saying right here is, God listened to me because I asked. That's what Samuel means. Then the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. So a year happens, and they go back to Shiloh, right, to do their yearly thing. And what do you think is going to happen between Hannah and her sister wife, Peninnah? Because remember, every year, Peninnah would just ridicule her and make fun of her. But now she has a baby boy. So what's the system going to be like when she goes to Shiloh this time? If I was writing the book, I would have Hannah show up in Shiloh carrying this baby and then going to her. Peninnah wants to you kind of take her down again and saying, huh. Right? Something like that. Like, look at me. There would be kind of a retribution, ridicule going on right here. And she would really show things else. Because this was the time, every single year, she would suffer under her sister wives' abuse. Every single year. Where we should be doing religious stuff and seeking God's justice. Instead, I get this. So I would just turn the tables this year. I would turn the tables and just rub it in the other way. Mine's more beautiful than any of yours. And look, I have a son. Right? Isn't that how you write the story? Okay, you think I'm crazy. But Hannah did not go up. She didn't go. She didn't go. Why wouldn't she go? She didn't go. For she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I'll bring him. Oh, okay. Well, we're still nursing Samuel. That's not really a great excuse, because there was women who had come with very young infants. They were nursing. There's something more going on right here. As soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. So what she's saying is, I'm not going right now because I'm still nursing this child. But when I no longer need to nurse this child, the next time we go to Shiloh, I'm taking him there and I'm leaving him there. Okay, I did not expect this. Of course, this is what she prayed to God. She said, give me a son and I'll give him to you. But this child has to be weaned to do this. So how, ladies, how old is a child when they're weaned typically? I mean, what age? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, somewhere there. I mean, just a small child. Okay, this sounds foolish to me, because when you know about Hophni and Phinehas, the dirtbag priests, and their seemingly permissive and a little clueless dad, Eli, and then you're going to take a little baby, a child, and you're just going to drop him there and say, well, here's your priest, go train him. I don't think I'd do that. It seems wrong. But this is what she prayed. And this is what with Hannah makes her really quite a remarkable person. Because her promise to God is something that God had inspired her to do, because God needed a Samuel. By the time that, the judges finish and Saul comes around and David comes around, he needed a Samuel. So she's actually doing the will of God and she doesn't know it. But she's doing it in such a way that as a mother, as a parent, I would be a little more cautious. In fact, I probably would have said instead, I'm not going to drop off my, 3, 4, 5-year-old. I'm going to wait until, let's get to his bar mitzvah. Yeah, let's get to 13. Let's get to somewhere there where he actually becomes a man. And then, instead of learning his dad's trade, he's going to come and he's going to become trained by you to be a priest. That makes a lot more sense to me. And that's why I don't write the Bible. Because she drops off a small child. So she's saying, I'm not going with you this time, but when I do go and present him to the Lord, I'm really going to present him to the Lord. I'm going to leave him there, and he's going to dwell there forever. Okay, we'll come back to this, but this whole thing, even though she prayed and said, God, if you give me a son, I'll give him to you. Many of us, well, maybe not many of us, I did when I was younger, like in about 4th grade, came down with a horrible chest pain, and I said, God, if you take this away from me, I'll serve you the rest of my life. Now, I didn't really mean that I would serve him the rest of my life. I was actually scared to death. However, I think I was being prophetic too, because, here I am. Anyway, you wonder about this. She could have reneged on the deal and said, now that you've given me a son, I have so wanted this son for so long. Maybe I can not renege on my deal to God. Maybe I can just wait until a more appropriate time. I mean, give me like maybe 8 to 10 years of nurturing and raising this small boy. That would just be the delight of my heart. I have waited for him so long. But instead she says, once he can eat solid food, he's yours. We'll talk more about this. This is just amazing. So Elkanah, her husband, said to her, well, do what seems best to you. A little bit of cluelessness popping out again. I mean, it's like, no, what are you talking about? He doesn't even try and change her mind. He says, well, you do what's best, you know. If you have that baby boy that you've wanted all this time, do you want to give him to Eli and his crazy 2 sons? Well, you know, do whatever you want to do. Oh, man, Elkanah. But wait until you've weaned him. Yeah. Only may the Lord establish his word. This is an interesting last statement from him, because he's saying, do what you think is right, but do what God wants is right, which actually in this particular case, God needs a Samuel, you know, later on in the timeline. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. So she stayed home from those events until Samuel was weaned. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine. This is part of the sacrifice she's going to do on behalf of dedicating the son. She goes up that year, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, and the child was young. Wow. We're taking a small child to Eli. And then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. There you go. And she said, oh, my Lord, talking to Eli, oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. And guess what? For this child I prayed. This is an answer to my prayers. Remember, Eli, when we were standing here and you thought I was drunk and I said, no, I'm vexed and all these bad things and I'm praying for a baby. This is the baby. There it is. He's here. Woo. Oh. And the Lord has granted me my petition that I made for him. The Lord listened to my prayer, Eli. He listened to my prayer. And here is the physical evidence. This baby boy named Samuel. Therefore, I've lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he's lent to the Lord. Kind of a funny verb, lent. It's a hard translated word. It means basically given and dedicated. I'm giving it to you. She's not saying you're adopting him. He'll always be my son. So that's the idea about I'm giving him to you. He'll always be my son, but he's yours. He's yours. Giving him to Eli. Therefore, I've lent him to the Lord, and as long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. So what she's saying, which really is it's an amazing thing in the culture of the time. You remember the firstborn. You remember the differences with the firstborn in a family? Well, the firstborn for her was a really big deal. I mean, very big deal. And in families where the firstborn was the oldest, you know, hers probably isn't the oldest because of Penina's children. But for the firstborn, there's some expectations that the firstborn will do something like what the father does, taking on the father's work, stuff like that. In multiple wives families, I don't know if that counts for the oldest of all the wives. I'm not really sure. But we're talking about a firstborn. We're talking about a firstborn and an only child that she gives up. And she says, here he is. For his entire life, he's yours. Train him in your profession, Eli, not in my husband's profession. Train him in your profession. From being a small child. And he worshiped the Lord there. Talking about Samuel. Okay, let's wrap this up a little bit because we need to do some thinking about this. So here's the timeline. There's where God needs a principal man to steer the nation of Israel in a critical direction. And Hannah is the one who's there. And in her desperation, in her vexation, in her confusion about why God has closed her womb, she hopes and dreams for a child. And she says, God, if you provide this child, he's yours forever. He's yours forever. And as a result, Samuel's born, and Samuel has a distinct and powerful impact on the entire timeline of Israel. Huge. Because Hannah gave him to the Lord. Now, again, what's really quite astonishing here, you know, mothers, You understand when you have children how attached they are to you. Jim's speaking the obvious again. But when your first child comes, a child that you have waited for, maybe not because, you haven't had opportunity or something's wrong, but throughout your entire life as you grow up as a woman, you're waiting for this first child, to meet this first child. And your hopes and your expectations and your delight in this child. I mean, I remember seeing Dorothy when our Catherine, our oldest, was put in her arms. It's like the room lit up. Your heart is just embedded in that child, right? Just embedded in that child. And then to say to God, he's yours. He's not really mine. He's yours. So much so that by the time he's a toddler, he's gone out of your house 24/7. How can a woman make that choice? And it's not just because there was a contract when she prayed. Give me a boy, I'll give him back to you. It's deeper than that. There's something in the last part of this narrative, and by the way, that's the end of the narrative when it comes to the birth of Samuel. But there's something in this narrative as she's talking to Eli that she seems enthusiastic about this. There's something about she's saying, this is not only the right thing to do, this delights my heart to do. What changed? Well, we'll get an insight on that in just a second. But there's an epilogue, and that's how we get the insight. Because we didn't finish the story about Samuel and about Hannah. She does show up in chapter 2 of 1 Samuel. But those are the only places. 1 Samuel chapter 1, chapter 2. But in chapter 2, we finally get a view into her heart about what changed. How could she make such a bold decision with her firstborn? I mean, how is that possible? And the epilogue starting in chapter 2 is a prayer that she prays. And it takes the entirety of chapter 2. And if you've never read this prayer, we're not going to have time to read it this morning. I really suggest you read it. But I'm going to give you the very first line because it tells you what changed in her heart. And Hannah prayed and said, this is the first line of her prayer, my heart exults in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. Something about her petty conflict with Peninnah, the sister wife, has been transferred to the Lord rather than keeping it herself. You see it here because she says, my heart exalts in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. Well, the horn, again, it's a cow's horn. And horns always symbolically in the Old Testament, well, and in Revelation too. Horns always symbolize focused power, right? If a cow or a bull comes up to you with a horn, okay, so they weigh a ton. But now you put a ton behind a sharp spike, and now you've got focused power. So every time you see the word horn there, you're thinking the ultimate expression in the Old Testament of what power is. Now Hannah felt powerless with Peninnah, her sister wife. She was abused and she was ridiculed all those years, year after year after year, in the same context where she should have been finding some kind of healing from the brokenheartedness she had from God himself in Shiloh. But that she wasn't getting it. Instead, she was getting the opposite. So now what she says at this point, what has switched in her mind isn't her powerlessness in the face of her sister wife. What she says is she realized the power that's here, but it's from God. It's not from me. Which is why she doesn't go neener, neener, neener and show off the boy the next time she sees him. She doesn't do that. She says, my heart exalts in the Lord. I lift him up. I don't lift me up or my husband Elkanah or, I don't lift anyone else up or myself for the fact I can't. I lift God up. God's the one who's exalted here because he is the focused power in this circumstance. He's the one that makes his will known. He's the one who can actually change my situation and bring a child. What incredible power. All I did was ask, and he says, okay, because he has the focused power to do that. And then she goes on, she says, my mouth derides my enemies, but she's not doing neener stuff. What she's doing is because I rejoice in your salvation. In your salvation. So although there's a discussion with her enemies, and that might be Peninnah or anyone else, although there's a discussion, she's not going to discuss her power or her worthfulness because God has given her a son. She's not going to mention any of that stuff. All she's going to do is talk about God's salvation. God is the one who brings me out of the darkness into the light. The word salvation always has this idea of being sprung out of a jail, going from a closed space to a large open space. So she says, okay, you want to talk about power? You want to talk about how things change? I'm not going to talk about my power in the circumstance. I'm going to talk about God's power to bring salvation to my circumstance. That's it. So here and through the rest of the prayer, I recommend you read it. It's just great. But through this prayer, you see that even though she had reason to be dissatisfied with Elkanah, her well-intentioned but somewhat unthinking husband, although she had reason to be mad at the high priest, Eli, all these people she's not getting any support from, she suddenly realizes that God himself is her advocate and the power to change her circumstance. That's what she realizes. And she realizes that she's suffering not in obscurity, but when she says, remember me, he remembers her. It's not like God forgot her. Don't take it that way. But what it is that she's saying that when God remembers me, it means that God sees and he acts on my behalf, even if everyone else does not see. He acts on my behalf. Wow, this theme shows up so much. He sees me, and he is my salvation. It does raise an interesting question, and I don't have a good answer to this, so you'll have to think about this with me as well. Why did God allow her to be barren for so many years? It was purposeful, because it said that God closed her womb. What did it... You have to not just ask why did he do that and why it looks so unfair with Peninnah. But the issue is you have to look downstream in the story and you have to see the result, the gold that came from that ongoing train wreck that we talked about last time. You have to see what happened in her life. And then you can start to piece together why it is under that kind of constant ritual abuse that something changed that became gold in her. And this is the beginning of the statement of that. She suddenly was transformed into a woman who understood and knew God better than she ever did before. She didn't blame him for those years of barrenness, but she did realize that the focused power of God sees me and acts on my behalf when I just lay my appeal in front of him. It's so good. Now, at the end of that chapter, so again, read the chapter 2 of 1 Samuel. Read the whole chapter 2. And at the end of the chapter, after she finishes her prayer, this is the little epilogue at the end of the prayer. So read the prayer and you'll see her heart has changed. Her heart has changed in such a way that her passion for God overcame her passion for the son she waited for so long. That's key. So here's how it wraps it up, chapter 2. She conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. When God opened her womb, he opened it. And so there you go. So there's that great blessing. But the bigger issue in all of this, right after that, at the end of the chapter 2, it says, and the boy Samuel grew in the presence of the Lord. And that was key because she wanted Samuel to be in the presence of the Lord, to be near that tabernacle, to be in the midst of all that goes on with the priests, and to understand who this God is based on the people who supposedly know him the best. The ones who run the tabernacle, the ones who do the sacrifices, the ones who go in and pray for the nation of Israel. I want him to be close to that. That's what I want him to do. And that's exactly what happened. He grew in the presence of the Lord. And somehow, we don't understand, he escaped the silliness of Hophni and Phinehas. I don't know how. But God in his protectiveness told Hannah that if you give him to me, I'll take care of him. And he did. And turned him into one of the greatest people in the Old Testament. Easily moved by the will of God. And so powerful in terms of the Holy Spirit working through him that eras came to an end with the judges. And Saul was given. And then David, the one who prefigured the coming Messiah, was given. And it was all because God so easily could lead Samuel. And that's because Hannah was so easily led by God. And then what can happen? Okay, I'll close with this. This isn't really meant to talk about her situation, but in a way, this is what I heard God saying. If God, you do a commentary on Hannah, This is what I'd hear God saying. Oh, that they had such a heart in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it may be well with them and with their sons forever. Yeah. Yeah. The story of Hannah is just, it's heartbreaking in the front end. Such routine abuse. And then it's just delightful in the end as God remembers her and hears her prayer and then so tangibly provides the one that she's been waiting for all along. And in her gratefulness and thankfulness to God, she says, well, he's yours. By the way, if you've ever wondered what the whole thing about in the Old Testament about giving your first fruits, all that thing about the firstborn being God's, you have to redeem him back from God if you want to be in your household. It's this. It's this. So in her thankfulness, she realized that God himself loves me more than I ever understood. He gave me the answer to my prayer. And so, God, I give to you what I love more than everything else. Now, that's a good trade. Are we done, Jim? Yes, because we're going to sing this song right here. She was not shaken, although she was vexed and perplexed. And yeah. But God sees you, and he hears you, and he knows your prayers. And even if everyone around you says you're drunk or out of your mind, God knows your true heart, and he answers your prayer. Okay, let's pray. Father, my heart breaks with her in those years. And Lord, I know your heart breaks with her as well. But through all of that, you gave her such a profoundly new understanding of the God who is near us and the God who sees us, like with Hagar, and the God who listens to our prayers. And the God, when we come to him and delight ourselves in him, he gives us the desires of our heart. And Lord, our desires are you. Are you. Thank you for giving us this story. Thanks for opening our eyes to how we need to not only ask you what vexes us and ask for your hand in those things that vex us, but Lord, that you free us from possessiveness of the best things that you give us in order that we might offer them to you in thanksgiving. And Lord, I wish I knew more about her. I really do. She is such a standout in my mind, a woman that I would love to talk to, find out more about the process. But Lord, that may come someday. But we do know that in all of this, you have demonstrated yourself, and your character and your nature has been demonstrated in how you cared for her. And we thank you. And we thank you for this wonderful son who you raised up to change the eons of the nation of Israel. Thank you that faithfulness on such a small level, just in our households, can be used by you to change the world. Wow. That's a new thought. So thank you for this now in Jesus' name.